Hello there. It's October the 25th, and I'm here to present an answer to a question that somebody sent in. If you have any questions for me, just go ahead and send them in to me by email at aaron@aaronbudgeon.net, and I'll do my best to answer them. This is a different kind of question. This is an economic, political kind of a question, and I'm free to answer any kind of question on these videos because I'm not being sponsored by some nonprofit corporation of any kind. This is my own personal project, and this is one of those questions. This is one of those political, economic kinds of questions that somebody sent in. And so feel free to just send me any kind of question you'd like, and if it's something that I think I could maybe be helpful with, I don't mind answering it. This is a unique one. And that's asking, why is it that no one seems to be fighting over Switzerland? And apparently there's some things going on in the news presently that this is from Diane. Diane, I don't remember where you're from, but you mentioned there's some things in the news of things going on, and you're thinking that there's a lot of evil happening over in that part of the world. And you're wondering, is this maybe why it is that there's never really been any major war taking place in Switzerland because the place is just so evil that maybe nobody really wants to take over it, or maybe it's just so evil that nobody wants to stand up against it, or maybe nobody, maybe that's because a lot of wars are coming from there, maybe, or something like that. I didn't ask Diane about this, but those are some things that I suppose we could think about. But you're kind of wondering, why is it that nobody seems to have fought over that area? I'll tell you that from what I can tell, with regards to Switzerland, and I do have some personal knowledge about it because I have done some work over there. I used to work in the world of international banking, and when I did, of course, I spent time in Switzerland and the neighboring country, Liechtenstein. And both of them are really important. You have to understand the role that each country has. Now, the simple answer as to why they haven't had any major war is because the people are heavily armed. All right, the population itself. There's a law, in fact, that requires every male of a certain age, unless you decide that you have psychological issues, then they'll accommodate that. But you got to prove it. You got to get evidence that you have some psychological problems. But everybody's required. Every man is required to have, an assault rifle and a lot of ammunition. Okay, and so everyone is required to be heavily armed there in Switzerland. It's just part of the law. It's part of the country. And what happens as a consequence of that is not that you have all these murders happening, obviously. There are a lot of people who believe that if someone has a firearm, well then a murder is going to take place, and of course not. It's part of these ancient religious beliefs where people believe that there were spirits in rocks and in trees and stuff like that, thinking that this gun has some evil spirit in it of some kind, and if it exists, if it's in the hands of somebody, then somebody's going to be murdered. That just is not reality. And if a person doesn't have access to one of those things, there are so many different ways to cause destruction and death in other people's lives. It's unrealistic, all right? But Switzerland is a good example of this to show that everybody's armed, everybody's required to be armed, and they don't have these kinds of issues at all. I suppose if somebody decided to use their weapon inappropriately, well then all their neighbors are going to come upon them quickly, as well. And so there's a big argument for having better security in your society if everyone is armed, because if somebody commits a crime, then the people who are closest to the crime physically are the ones who are, they're not going to be victims. They're the ones who are going to solve the problem right away. But there's a whole lot that can be said about that. There are a lot of people who actually want these kinds of things to happen, pretending like they don't, because they have other political kinds of objectives in mind. But this is one of the reasons why Switzerland has never had a war of this nature, and why people are not going to want to invade Switzerland, because you're going to be fighting an army of the entire population, relatively speaking. And it's not like you're going to go into some place that's disarmed, that won't be able to fight back. Their society is very well structured, all right, very well structured, with provisions and bunkers, all over the place. The overpasses, for example, for the highways, they're constructed so you blow both ends, or you fill in both ends of the overpasses, and they're stocked with food and supplies and weapons and ammunition and stuff all over the place. I can remember taking the train from Switzerland to Liechtenstein and back all the time, and being able to spot the emplacements, the gun emplacements and stuff built into the mountains, that are somewhat camouflaged, but not perfectly. You can see where these placements are really at. They're just covered up, and they're just waiting there for the time when they're needed, in which case you just throw a few people in there, and you've got missile launch facilities and communications facilities and all kinds of stuff. And so Switzerland is their entire society is built on defending themselves from war, in many cases. So for another country to invade is highly unlikely. All right, now there's another reason why they are unlikely to be participating in a war. The other reason why is because they are a banking capital of the world. There's a lot of banking that goes on there, and there are so many countries who use Switzerland as the place where their currencies are stored or exchanged, that if anybody wants to go in there and invade, you're going to be going after a lot of people's currency. Okay, a lot of the countries and the people and the businesses and governments, they store currency there that if one nation decides to go and try to invade, well, it's going to cause a disruption in everybody's economy, because a lot of business is handled through the currency trading systems of Switzerland. And so that's a big issue. Now, they also have a partnership with the neighboring country, Liechtenstein. Now, Liechtenstein has a unique role in the world, and that is to be a gold depository for the world, and there are governments, and there are families, and there are individuals. A lot of people store gold in Liechtenstein. Okay, they store their currencies like dollars, francs, pesos, whatever. That is transacted in Switzerland, but the gold is stored in Liechtenstein. All right. Now, Liechtenstein does not have its own army. They have no way to defend themselves from war. What they do is they lease the Swiss army. Okay, they have a lease agreement with the Swiss army that in the event that there's a war of anybody going after the gold stored in Liechtenstein, well, then you're going to deal with the Swiss army. That's the agreement that they have with the Swiss, their neighbors. All right, and they have the same policy that everybody stores their gold in Liechtenstein, just like everybody stores their currencies in Switzerland. They store their gold in Liechtenstein. So if anybody tries to make war and take Liechtenstein, well, you're going to be going after the whole world. The United States was used as a gold depository long ago. After World War II, for example. That was a big issue that a lot of countries, because of what was going on with the war, the World War happening in Europe, that they shipped their gold off to the United States for safekeeping, because you didn't know who was going to roll their tanks in and take all your gold. And so they moved it over there, but they also moved it to Liechtenstein. Now, Liechtenstein is used mainly as a storage facility. The United States was used for international trade, all right? And so the gold was shipped here, and it was used for international trade in order to resolve settlements in commerce between different countries. And so the gold would be moved from one cage to another in the same bank. Just be moved from one area to another, or gold bars would be assigned back and forth to being owned by one person or another. And so that's how international trade took place. But it wasn't used, so the United States wasn't used so much as a means of storage. That was mainly what Liechtenstein was about, right next to Switzerland. Now, if there was to be a war, who do they expect will wage war against them? You know, who's necessarily the most likely enemy of the Swiss? All right. Well, you know, that's an interesting question, and it just so happens that that when I was visiting one of my friends over there and I was hanging out at his place, I asked him, "Hey, listen, can I see your weapon?" He says, "Well, we're not supposed to really show you where it is or what it looks like." I said, "I understand. I won't tell anybody that you specifically showed me, but I'll tell you folks now that I had a friend and I asked him if I could see his weapon. So he pulled it out and I didn't see where he had it hidden. Everybody's supposed to have it hidden and in a place where you can't easily find it." And I got to have a good look at it, and I'm very familiar with weapons and the way that they're made. I've done a lot of work repairing machine guns and stuff, and I could build one from scratch. I've got skills, and so I know enough about these things. So I asked him, what caliber is this? And he said, "Well, it's 5.6. I said, 5.6? Did you just say 5.6? You didn't say 5.56, did you? You said 5.6. And he said, "Yeah, that's right. It's 5.6 millimeters." And I said, "Well, that's very interesting, because the NATO round, the North Atlantic Treaty Association, the NATO organization, the NATO countries, their standard ammunition is 5.56 millimeter, which means that the Swiss can fire the ammunition of the NATO armies, but the NATO armies probably had better not put the Swiss ammunition in their weapons." All right? That's a big deal in war, And it also confirmed to me that the people who they're most concerned about are NATO. They're not concerned about people like Russia, or the Soviets at that time. They weren't worried about those kinds of people. They're worried about America, and the NATO countries, because, it turns out that the United States and some of its allies do have quite a unique history of making war against other nations in order to steal stuff, or for other reasons that are related to money. But that's what the Swiss know, and that's what they see, and so that's how they protect themselves from war, especially because NATO and the United States tend to be the aggressors in many ways. And you might think, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you say that, Aaron? Well, because, in a lot of history, it turns out that wars don't just happen for the reasons that people say that they usually happen. What they tell the people in this country, for example, is not necessarily what really happened. What they're telling people is what they're telling people to try to get everybody to go to war, but they don't tell you what really provoked the war. All right, wars are provoked, and there, there's a lot of history with regards to why wars start, and they usually start with a provocation. But for some reason, people never want to talk about the provocations. For example, just to kind of date this particular answer to this kind of a question, in recent times, and with what's happening right now, which could very well be the beginning of World War III, with what's happening right now, in the region of Ukraine, for example. All right, that was a provocation from NATO. All right, it's not something. It's not a provocation from the Russian people, from Moscow, from Putin, the leader at this time. It's not about him. This is their reaction to how they were provoked by NATO. You always got to have your punctuation correct. Where does the sentence actually begin? What's the punctuation of the sentence? You have a punctuation. It's the idea of where do things really start and where do things really stop. A sentence, for example, starts with a capital letter and ends with a period. Well, there might be a comma or a semicolon in between. And what people are talking about, for the most part, in our media and in the area where we are right now, they're talking about things that happened after the comma, as if that's where it started. And it didn't. It started a little bit earlier than that. All right. And what could it be about? Well, it could very well be World War III. And just like many wars are started over the idea of what are we going to go steal, it's about theft is what it is. And in many cases, not all, other cases it's been about just trying to gain access to minerals, or it's about drugs. There's been a couple of wars that were just about having access to drugs, or that was part of it. There's different reasons, but the idea of stealing other people's stuff, their gold, is a common reason. This one, if it starts the way that it seems to be playing out, it looks like it's an opportunity for governments to be able to default on their debts. All right, that a lot of governments, they owe a lot of money, even to their own people, in terms of social benefits, retirement funds, things like that. And this is a way for the governments to steal from their own people because they will not meet the obligations that they made with their own people. All right, so there's an opportunity to default on the debts, or maybe we'll kill a bunch of people off. That happens a lot, especially in war. And that's one way, or we'll tell them there's some kind of medical threat, and we'll get them to give themselves a lethal injection, or an injection that'll maybe kill them a few years later with cancer or something else, or maybe it won't take that long at all, or give them terrible heart conditions or blood clots in their legs or whatever. Just give them a lethal injection and tell them it's there to protect themselves, or better yet, it's there to protect others. And if they don't do it, then obviously they hate other people. That kind of nonsense. This is what governments are doing in order to default on the debts. Okay, and then the rest of it you pay for with cheaper currency. You just inflate the currency to the point and blame it on the war. Blame it on World War III and say that that's why the currencies lost their value. So we'll pay you. We'll pay you what we said we were going to pay you. But the value of what you get in terms of the currency is certainly not what you would have gotten otherwise, And so these are the kinds of things that are taking place all around this idea of why is it that nobody would invade Switzerland? They got lots of stuff to steal. Well, people are not going to do it because you're going to be stealing everybody's stuff. And also you got a different kind of army. All right. Now the political environment there's something else to look into if you wanted to explore this further. The political environment there is quite interesting because you have Switzerland that is a democracy, and then you have Liechtenstein that's a kingdom, it's run by a king. All the decisions are made by the king of Liechtenstein. But in Switzerland, right next door, all the decisions are made by the people in a democracy. All right. And so there is an interesting relationship between the king and the kingdom and the people of the democracy next door. It's a very unique relationship in terms of how they work together and how they cooperate together. All right. So that's something to explore if you really wanted to look into this more. I could say a whole lot more about that, but this is the answer to the question that was given, and so I'm going to stop with this one. All right. Thank you.